Greetings, show flowers, and welcome to today's webinar, the first in a three-part series we're calling Rundown Bootcamp. I'd like to go ahead and introduce my co-host today, Sales Director here at Shoflo, Brian Mauger.
Hey everyone, happy to be here. Excited to have JP walk us through session one.
Yes, today's session is going to be on building a rundown from scratch. We know it's been a while since a lot of you have been in the app, and you might have forgotten a few things. So we wanted to walk you through a few of the best practices for doing so. One thing I want to say right off the bat, though, is that if you happen to have any questions, just go ahead and post them on the chat window. Brian will be monitoring that chat and be able to, pitch them up to me, and I'll try to answer them live or during our live Q&A session at the end of today's broadcast. So let me go ahead and jump right into my screen share. So let's give the team a moment to pull my screen share up. There we go. Perfect. Now, what we see here is the team dashboard. And the team dashboard is where you'll land if you are a team admin logging into Shoflo for the first time. Team admin is the highest level permission in Shoflo, and a team admin permission is what's necessary to create new events, duplicate old ones, etc. So if you wanted to create a brand new event, you could do so by simply clicking on the blue Create Event button here near the top right. You would give this new event a name, select a location for it. Let's say this is happening in Las Vegas. Of course, select whatever templates you might want to pre-populate your event with. And by the way, we have a lot of templates that you can use to help out, essentially give you some ideas of best practices and how you can structure your content. So we strongly encourage you to use these templates. Then you'd simply set a date for the event. Let's say that this event is going to be 2 weeks from today, the day of our second session in the Rundown Bootcamp, and we'll just leave the end date to be that same day, right? The last thing you can do is add some event branding, but I'll go ahead and skip that for now and just go ahead and hit Create Event. Now, that's if you're starting a brand new event from scratch, right? Now, it's possible that you created this amazing rundown in Shoflo about 2 years ago, and you'd like to reuse that rundown. Well, it is possible for you to go to past events and copy a rundown from that event to this newly created event. So let me show you how to do that. From the team dashboard, you'd simply click on the Archived Events tab, and there go to the event that contains that rundown. We'll just say RTMP streaming is the one that contains it. And then I go to the ellipsis menu for the rundown I want and select the copy to another event option. Here, I'll just select the new event that I just created and hit copy. And this will take that rundown file and copy it over to my new event, which if I was quick enough, I could have just clicked on that fast link there, or just navigate on over to the new event where I will see the rundown that was included as a template and the rundown that I just copied over from that old event. But sometimes it's a lot more than just one rundown that you created. It's an entire event's worth of contents with schedules, lists, crew contact info, and 5 days worth of rundowns. In that case, it actually makes more sense for you to duplicate the entire event instead of creating an event from scratch and then copying over files to that new event. So let me walk you through copying an old event, which will take all of the files that are within that old event and copy them as well. So you'll have all of them as starting points for your new event that you're creating. Similar to how in my copy a rundown example, I went to the rundown itself. In this case, I would just stay here within the Archived Events tab, select the event that I want to be the foundation for my next one, go to the ellipsis menu here and select Duplicate. You'll notice that it opens up a modal that is very similar to what we see when we're creating a brand new event. And let's say this is going to be today's all hands meeting, right? And I'll give it, it already has today's start date. Don't need to bring in any additional templates right now. And I can just leave the other details the way that they are. I'll go ahead and hit create. And this is now going to create a brand new event for me here in the upcoming events area. You'll notice I now have this all hands meeting, which will contain all of the files that were in that original all hands meeting event. And another thing that it does is it copies over the crew as well. So if you're reusing the same crew from event to event, you get to skip that process of re-inviting in those crew members. So that's another benefit of duplicating events. And actually, I'll go ahead and just pause right there and see if any questions have come through to the Q&A or the chat. Brian?
Yeah, a couple of people have asked if we're recording this, and yes, we will. So we will be sending out the recording to everybody that's registered. So that's great. In terms of questions on the software, when creating an event, JP, is it required to put in a location?
Location is optional. You can use that field instead as a generic description, but no, it is not required.
Okay, great. Other than that, no questions yet. So reminder, everybody, if you have a question, jump over to the Q&A tab and you can submit your questions there.
Great. So what I'm going to do now is jump over to the Rundown Bootcamp event that I have here already. And you'll notice that there's already a few files in here. There's some example rundowns that I'm going to be using for today's session. There is our actual rundown for today's live broadcast. And there's also a theater and studio instance in here. But something I wanted to discuss today is that you can use Shoflo as cloud storage for, well, distributing all of those other media assets or PDF files, Word documents, everything else that goes into your event, right? It's not all just going to be rundowns. So it's really easy for you to load files into an event. And when you do so, all crew members who have access to this event will also have access to those files. So a great way of distributing content because there's no limit to how many files you can share, how much total storage, etc. Let me show you how.
JP, quick interjection there. We have a good question from Jessica Kaufman. Can you save staff and crew members as part of an event template?
Yeah, actually, that is a clever use case. If you create an event and you are going to just save that event in your system as a template to use every time you duplicate an event, you can add crew to that template so that every time you duplicate it, you're also bringing over that crew. That's a clever use case.
Awesome. And then another one from Aaliyah. Do your guests have to download the software? I can take that one. This is a cloud-based app, so really it's just going to live in the browser. There's no downloads necessary. Although if you sent the guest pass out, which is a link, and I think JP is going to cover that here in a little bit, the guest pass is something that you can download a PDF. So that's the alternative way to get somebody access to the documents.
Absolutely. And let me show you how to upload some files to an event dash. Now you can just use drag and drop right onto the dashboard here, or you can select that same blue Create New button and this time select File Upload. And I will just select one of these random files that we have here. Let's just say it's this full screen overlay that I want to bring in. I can upload that file and it immediately shows up over here. And I can use drag and drop to organize my dashboard so that not everything is right at the top level, right at the root. And if I click on this Studio Media folder, you'll notice that there's already a ton of content in there. And this is content that I uploaded ahead of time, right? This content is accessible to me inside of Shoflo Studio instances, but also it's available for me to link to within my document. And I'll show you that in a second. But the great power of that is that With things like a PDF export or even a guest pass, those links are active, meaning that you can distribute access to those files via the PDF exports and guest pass. So let me show you that. These again are all the files that I uploaded earlier. I'll move back over to the dashboard and this breadcrumb there. And now I will just go ahead and jump into our rundown, live broadcast rundown example. And what I'm going to talk about is some of the formatting best practices and give you some ideas of how you might build out different files. This is the rundown for today's actual webinar. You'll notice that there's general notes at the top about when things are getting set up, when rehearsals start, who is doing what role. This is a good practice and one that I would recommend to make your very first row just contain lots of general information. Now, below that, you'll notice that we have a lot of color formatting. I like to use color in both the prefix before a row title to let me know what that is going to be like. And I like to use different colors for headers as well, so I can quickly scrub through a rundown and find certain sections based on color. But the thing I really wanted to draw your attention to right now regarding formatting are these hyperlinks that you see in here. Not so much this one here or this one, because that's just regular URL content that I wanted to have there as a reference. I'm referring to this one right here. This is a link to an actual file that exists on the event dashboard. And that link would be exported along with PDFs and guest pass. In order for me to embed a link to a file, I would simply select the cell in which I wish to embed that link, then select the hyperlink icon from the cell formatting toolbar at the top. And if I am linking to an external file, I would simply paste the URL there. And if I am linking to a file that I've already uploaded to this event, I would select this second option here and then click on the file I wish to link to. Perhaps we want to use countdown music, and I want to make sure that my graphics team or my audio team has access to that file. Or maybe it is my music team. So I can copy the contents from that cell and just paste it elsewhere if that's where I want it to belong. Brian, questions?
Yeah, absolutely. So Lona, I hope I'm saying the name right, asks, what is the benefit of using Shoflo events as storage for media, assets, documents, etc., versus something like Dropbox or Google Drive? And I think, JP, you just pointed out one of the things is that within the rundown, when you're linking to a media asset, we're just going to go ahead and show you a list of all the assets that have been uploaded. So that makes it very easy to locate the files. And then the other part of it, I think, is just having everything in the same ecosystem, right on that event dashboard, so that your crew has one place to go to view all the pertinent information. JP, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, that's exactly right. All in one place so that your crew doesn't have to go to different places, and you can manage permissions in one location versus ensuring that you're managing permissions in that other file distribution place, or, Dropbox, box, whatever it is.
That's great.
And the other is, of course, using the guest pass, which is among my favorite features, but I will show you a little bit more about that later on. So just to reiterate, though, when it comes to the cloud storage feature of Shoflo, or your ability to upload files to an event, there is no limit to how many files you can upload to an event, and any files uploaded to an event will be accessible by all of your crew, essentially all of the people who have access to this event, regardless of their permission level. Even if they have the lowest level permission, which is a read-only user, they will still be able to access these files. And the only limit that we have in place is how big a single file can be, and that limit is 1 gigabyte, so it's pretty generous there. Now, I did touch a little bit on user permission types, so I'm going to back out of this rundown and quickly just show you where you would be able to prepare and modify your user permission levels, and that's here from the crew tab. If I were to move over to the crew, you'll notice I've got a very large crew list, and this is our team here at Shoflo. And that's because they're all team admins. And team admins, of course, are a part of all events. But here in the permission list, I can modify what their permission is over this specific event. And like I mentioned earlier, even the lowest level permission, which is read-only, will still get access to all of the files here. I'll elaborate on these other permissions in a moment. But for now, I will jump back over to the dashboard, and I'm going to show you a different type of rundown now. I'm going to show you one with long form text. This is a script, and I'll discuss a few of the best practices when putting a script together inside of Shoflo. So I'll move over now to Rundown Prompter Script. And you'll notice that in this rundown, I have less department columns, less content on the right-hand side, and most importantly, I have lots of long-form text. There are two different views that we've designed for long-form text. One is the featured view, and by the way, you can access all of the views by using the appearance menu at the top right. I can just go to featured view here, and it looks like I've already got the script column selected, so I just need to select a row and it will show me the script for that particular row. Now, the other view that we've designed for long form text is the prompter view. And I'll just quickly move over to the prompter view here, and you'll see what the prompter view looks like. And you'll notice that it's threading all of the rows together. This is the best practice when it comes to using Shoflo prompter and building out long scripts. If you have 15 paragraphs worth of content, we encourage you to break that up across multiple rows as opposed to just putting lots of content in a single row. And this prompter view, by the way, also has a live broadcasting out component to it that we call remote prompter. And that's this link at the top. But this is something that we'll be covering in greater detail probably in the second and third training calls. For now, just know that if you are working with large amounts of text, you may prefer to work inside of prompter view or featured view. And yes, you can edit text while you are in here and add new lines of text. Simply clicking the save button or just deselecting a cell to, again, automatically save content there. In regards to long form text, that's really the only best practices that we can share is to split out the content across as many rows as possible. But Brian, any questions regarding that thus far?
I don't see any questions as it relates to the prompter and editing in there. We do have a couple of other questions jumping back to file storage. Dom had asked or made the statement that oftentimes files need to be updated. And so when you do that, if you've linked to them inside the rundown, will those links stay the same? Great feature request. I don't believe that's how it works just yet, but that's something that we could certainly take a look into. Other questions around what happens if internet cuts out? That's a pretty classic one that we've had for years. Best practices there that we would say is always have a printout. We oftentimes get the question, can you print your Shoflo? Yes, absolutely. PDF exports is your friend. I always suggest opening up Guest Pass in another tab. We did have a question about Guest Pass, and is that the same as read-only? JP, you want to jump into that topic?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it's one of the ones that I expected to cover here, but I'll wait till the end. I think that'll be best for me to go on that last.
And I'll touch on that one too. We're going to dive into that in a lot more detail in Rundown Session 2, which is called Beyond the Rundown. That's really where we're going to be discussing best practices for collaborating with others. Today's focus is really on you as probably the producer who's going to build out maybe 80% of this document. And then obviously the transition and the life cycle of an event would be, as you're getting closer to the event, inviting more people in. So Session 2 in 2 weeks, that's a little tease on what we'll be discussing there.
Yeah. So what I was going to do next is jump into this third rundown that I've created, the company meeting. And talk about some of the formatting that you'll see in there, and also elaborate a little bit more on one of our flagship features, the automatic timing, and a little bit about the show caller tracking associated with that as well. So I'll click Rundown, Company Meeting, and this brings us right into this rundown. This rundown, by the way, is a template that is available to you, in fact, to any user, when they're creating a brand new rundown from scratch. There's lots of really great rundowns in there. Again, I encourage you guys to take a look at all of them and see, some ways in which they can enrich your own rundowns. So here you'll notice that we've got some images embedded in all of the first rows of each section here. A lot of times this is a good practice when you're trying to make sure that your graphics operator is loading up the correct video. Maybe you're showing the first frame of the video, or maybe you're showing the first slide of the slide deck and things like that. Images embedded directly in the rundown is a great way to ensure that you're communicating visually with the team as well as via text, right? Now, another use case, maybe not so much in this company meeting example, but in larger events, if your A2 needs to know who it is that they're supposed to mic up in the back, right? Who's about to go on stage. Having an image of your presenter can also be really beneficial to the greater crew. So just use cases where embedding imagery can be really helpful. Now, something else that you'll notice that I did here is that I used different color codes for the different sections. This helps me visually kind of understand how far along in the show I am, which sections I'm looking at. Color coding can be a really useful tool. And we have keyboard shortcuts for applying quick color coding. Keyboard shortcuts, by the way, are another, if there is a pro tip, number one in Shoflo, it is to learn the keyboard shortcuts, which are all accessible by clicking the question mark icon at the top right of your screen. These will allow you to do things like apply formatting very quickly, or maybe just move around entire sections quickly as well. Brian, any questions? I heard your mic was on.
I don't think we have anything coming through. Nope, I think we're good.
All right. So next thing I want to talk about is timing. Now, we have 3 automated timing columns in Shoflo. Really 2 automated columns and 1 that is set by the user, the duration column. The way that the start and preset column use these values that you enter into the duration field to do all of those automatic calculations. Now, we see that this particular rundown is operating off of a 3 p.m. start. And I can tell that because it's got that flag next to this value right here. That flag is there to let me know that that is a manually set value. Someone set that manually, so we're going to respect that value. If I change it, though, to say 5 p.m., I'll have a new foundation for every subsequent element. And you'll see that the system automatically recalculates all of these values based on, of course, these durations and the new walk-in time that we have. The way the system works is it'll take the duration value, which I can also modify that, and add it to the start time of the element itself to calculate the start time of the subsequent element. So the most important thing to remember here is not to modify the actual start time of your elements, to instead modify the durations of those elements and allow the system to calculate the start times for you. It is possible for you to forget this or to break the automatic timing. And a common example of this is, say someone jumps into a time of a particular row and says, actually, I know that this needs to start at 5 on the dot. If they make that change, the system will add a flag there to automatically denote that that was a manually overwritten time. And every subsequent element is now going to be calculated off of this time. But notice that we have a 5 p.m. element following a 5:02, which can't happen. So If you ever run into an instance where you're building out your rundown, but it doesn't look like the times are adding up correctly, it could be that you have two sources of truth, right? Two different manual overrides telling the system to do conflicting things. And the important thing to know is it's always just going to take the last flag and use that as the foundation for every subsequent element. To remove an accidental manual override, you simply double click it and click on the reset arrow at the far right of that time picker. That will allow the system to go back to being automatically calculated. Whereas in the start column, it is recommended that you only have one manual override, one source of truth for your entire show. It is possible and encouraged in some scenarios for you to have multiple flags here in the preset column, which is also sometimes called the clock time column if you change the setting on it, but it is the same column. Here, instead of adding durations to its value to calculate the subsequent, we're actually subtracting. And what I'm doing here in this template is that I've denoted that each one of these sections gets 8 minutes, but perhaps I need to give development a little bit more time. I can give development team 10 minutes, and we'll notice that at the bottom, this extra row that I created there to section now has an extra 2 minutes left. That lets me know I have a little bit of padding. So I can either increase the amount of time that I give the retrospective and the KPIs talk, or you could also run into scenarios where this row at the bottom is actually letting you know that you are over by a little bit, and of course it will turn red and let you know how much you're over by. Now, as soon as we get to the very next row, you'll notice that there's a brand new flag there, brand new manual override. So of course, this starts a brand new 8-minute clock within this column here until the very next. And I know that timing is it's a very powerful feature, which means it's also very complicated and there's lots of little nuances to it. But as far as best practices go, these are the ones that I wanted to talk about today. Are there any questions so far, Brian?
Not as it pertains to the timing, which is a little bit surprising. That's usually everybody's favorite feature when they jump into Shoflo when you're coming from Excel or Google Sheets, because one of the big benefits there is you're not going to break any timing formulas or anything like that in Shoflo, and there's a lot of different scenarios that the rundown can handle in terms of timing. I imagine you're going to get there, JP, but we did have a question from Jessica Kaufman. Is it possible to move multiple rows in a rundown together? So maybe touching on the bulk actions.
Perfect. That's actually the very next thing I was going to talk about is bulk actions. And yes, let's say this block here where the development team was going to go, they're not going to go first anymore. They're actually going to go after sales, right? There's a few different ways I can do this, but first thing I like to do is hold down the shift key to bulk select a bunch of cells, and then I hit the tilde key, which is the keyboard shortcut for selecting those rows. Now that I've got the rows selected, I can either cut that group of rows from that location and then paste them elsewhere, or since in this scenario I just need to move them down a few times, I can use a keyboard shortcut to move down that block. And that keyboard shortcut's just a command down, and I press command down 10 times and it's now right after the sales block. Now, bulk selection can also be used when applying things like formatting. So let's say you wanted to apply special formatting to all the text in the sales block, right? Make it extra large text, and maybe you also wanted to center align that text. By bulk selecting those cells and then using the cell formatting toolbar at the top, I can apply those bulk changes and erase them as well. Brian, is that all of that question, or was there any more?
I think so. Yeah, just to reiterate there, Julia made a great suggestion. After you've done your bulk, make sure to hit escape, and that clears your selection so that you can move on with your next action. We did have a question circling back to timing. JP, would you mind touching on each of the icons within the timing dropdown?
Absolutely. So I'll start with the duration, since that's really where some of these are. Well, yeah. Here in the duration time picker, you'll see that there are 3 icons. The first one is going to be your mute icon. This means that this particular duration is not going to impact the automatically calculated columns, which of course are the start column and the preset column. This duration is going to be ignored by the automated calculations, which means you can still tell someone, say, hey, there's a video minutes long, but you don't want that 4.5 minutes of time that you've written out in there to throw off all of the auto calculations. So that's one use case for that particular button there. Now, we also have to the right of that the enable or disabled duration. For this one, it will prevent the IRT, or the item runtime clock, from restarting whenever the show caller enters that particular element. So an example for this use case would be that, let's say you have an 8-minute counter on the marketing section itself, right? And I'll just unhide that, and I'll put 8 minutes here. And I am going to mute this one, and I am going to disable all of the ones below. So that tells me that when I, as a show caller, begin calling the show and I track this marketing element, you'll notice that the item runtime clock at the top of the screen, which if I can click on that, that'll take that full screen. This will start counting down from the 8 minutes time that I allotted to the last enabled duration, which is this one here. Notice that the hourglass icon denotes that all these durations are disabled. And again, that means that if I hit the space bar to move into the next element, instead of the item runtime clock restarting at this new duration, it will continue to count down from this one up here. So that's this is one scenario in which you can use those 2 features, muting and disabling durations. The last icon is the eye icon, which also appears whenever you just hover over a duration. This will both mute it and disable it, and also dim it so that it's not quite as visible on your screen, only when you hover over it. This can help you when creating a document that you want to be able to scan through quickly and look at the times that are important, right? Like when I built out all of these sections, I hid the start time in the headers and the durations in the headers, as well as in the footer. And this is just to more visually distinguish between all these sections, since they would be redundant values anyways. Hopefully that explains that.
Yeah, thanks, JP. Jump in. A couple more timing questions have come in. Alona had asked if there was a way to just input start times for the items and have the durations auto-calculated. I can respond to that one. The durations are really the key thing that we're using to determine the start times and preset times. So you do need to input durations, and that's going to calculate everything else. Another question from Brendan. Can you set a flag and have the timing work backwards from there instead of ahead in time? JP, can you touch on that one?
Absolutely. And what I'll do to show that feature off best is create a brand new file, and I'll use one of our templates. And let's say we've got a hockey game going on. So I'll use our hockey game template, and I'll just hit create here, and then jump into this newly created rundown. Here, I've already got a template that contains a arrow, or really a flag, that dictates everything above it, right? And what I did to turn on reverse auto timing is use one of the other icons in this time picker, which are these flag icons here, but I selected the up arrow. This turns on reverse auto timing and tells the system this element needs to start at 5:08 p.m. So everything before it, I want you to calculate the start time so that they all finish prior to 5:08. Right? And that means that you're also inverting the flow of things when you make changes to durations. For example, if I were to take this 4-minute duration and change it to 2 minutes, that's actually going to move this time up. And if I made it bigger, it's going to move it back because it's always going to be taking this value, subtracting this to calculate this over here. And similar to how you can turn on reverse auto timing for your starts, you can also do so for your clock time or your preset time column. This essentially makes it a column that lets you know when things should happen relative to your puck drop, for example. Like the Zamboni ice cleaning might happen 18 minutes prior to puck drop. So an example here of reverse auto timing.
Thanks, JP. Another great question from Julia. Will there ever be a total runtime clock that works in tandem with item run time? So I imagine that's the situation where you'd want to know how long the entire show has been in process versus knowing how long each particular element has been running. That's not a feature that we currently have. I don't know, JP, if there's a hack to get there, but the timing feature set, specifically item runtime, and then the over-under is something that we're looking into enhancing here in the near future. So that's great feedback that's something that you'd want to have.
Yeah, the only way to do that right now would be to have the preset value zero out at the start of a show, like the rundown that I have for our live broadcast here, and then actually make the end of show row visible so that you get an idea of how long your show is right now based on adding up all of these durations. But yes, you're correct that is not a fully built out feature. This would be more of a workaround to get you that information.
Great. I don't think we have any other questions on timing.
Okay, cool. Then I am going to go off script here and actually ask Darren, who's in our control room right now, and in this same rundown to simply click on any one of these cells so that I can tease collaboration, which is a feature that is coming. I see Brian, I see Stevie and Inigo Montoya over here have their cells. This is our active collaborator feature. You can see that the borders around each one of the cells keeps moving around as different team members of mine work inside of this rundown. This is a great way to not step on each other's toes. Let's say I needed to make a change to this cell right here. Then on their screen, that cell would become filled in to immediately communicate to the team that I'm working in it. But I know that the guys are going to be covering that in 2 weeks, so I don't want to cover too much about that, but just kind of let you know. Also, the show caller tracking feature, which I touched on, is going to be covered in more detail there. But the important thing to know is that only the person with show caller permissions can begin to call the show and broadcast their location and show. And when they do so, which I'll actually just start doing that in a different show, and I'll quickly move over to that by using our quick navigation there. When they do that, you'll get a bright blue bar across the top, and anyone following along with the show caller will as well. This means they can focus on other things and have the show flow monitor just automatically update as they move through. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about was exporting and sharing content with other users. This too is something that they'll go into more detail about, but specifically I wanted to touch on GuestPass. And the reason for that is just how powerful of a tool it can be during early production, right? When you're creating all of your content for your events. Now, when it comes to sharing content, you'll find all of those options under the download or share icon here at the top right of your screen. Though PDF export might be one of your main output options, I encourage you to check out GuestPass. Clicking there will open up the GuestPass modal where I get to see the URL for this particular file's GuestPass. And I can also pick whether or not to include certain columns. And let me just go ahead and include all of the columns in there. If I were to open this up in a new tab, which I'll just go ahead and click on that, you'll notice that here in the GuestPass, I have a slightly more simplified view of that same content. All of the images are still embedded in there, and if there were any hyperlinks here, I could also click on those hyperlinks. But probably among my favorite parts of this particular feature is that you can share this link 4 weeks before your event with clients, vendors, and other interested parties. And when they arrive at this URL, they will be seeing the very latest version of the software. Furthermore, they don't need to be Shoflo users because there are no real-time benefits to this view. There are no real-time changes or following along with the show caller. You can share this link with anyone, which means that you can also help distribute assets to anyone by leveraging the guest pass and Shoflo's cloud storage feature. And lastly, if they just want to have their own PDF for printing out, they can always click on this download button here and create a PDF out of this particular rundown. So if changes happen, they can download a new one themselves and not have to bother you or your team to get that information.
That's great. That's one of the big objectives for us here at Shoflo, is to entirely eliminate having documents or people that have out of date documents. As soon as an update's made in your Excel file, you might be leaving people behind. So with the guest pass, that's a great way of keeping people up to date with access to the most relevant information without even inviting them into the software. So thanks for covering that one, JP.
Sure, and just to show you guys how it would look like if there were some actual hyperlinks in there, notice that if I click on any of these or hover over them, it does turn into the clicker. So I could download files that I've linked in this manner.
We've got a question. What are the differences between inviting somebody in through guest pass or sharing the guest pass and inviting them in as a crew with any of the permission levels? Read-only, contributor, admin, show caller. Can you touch on that one, JP?
Absolutely. The biggest difference is that if you are a user, you are behind an authentication. They have to log in, right? And a guest pass can be shared with anyone. Logging in means you have real-time benefits. So if I were to make a change to this cell and add some text, that text is going to automatically show up on your screen and on the screen of anyone else logged into this document the moment that change occurs. However, on the guest pass, you're not going to get that feature. However, someone with, say, read-only permissions, they would be able to see those changes live on their screen as they occur. Additionally, the lowest level permission, again, read-only, would also be able to follow along with the show caller. So the moment that show caller begins moving from row to row, they too will see that on their screen live. And I know the guys will cover this in greater detail, but that's the basics there.
Yeah, thank you. And so if you need that person to track along and see real-time edits, inviting them in as crew is your best bet. Alona asks, basically, if you're going to be uploading media on the event dashboard, can guest pass people view that in any other way? And really, the only way for your guest pass users to access any media is if you hyperlink it within the rundown. They don't have access to the event dashboard or any of the files that have been uploaded there. So again, another reason to invite them in if you want them to have access to all those files.
Yeah, the other way or workaround would be if, say, you create a rundown, and we'll just use default there. We'll call this media list. And then for this one rundown, all you're doing is linking to files you've already uploaded. So let's say right here, I'll just make this script wide, and I'm going to link to a file I've already uploaded. Here's the countdown music. I'll do that first. And then maybe here I link to the Bootcamp track. And just go use that. And in this way you could, but again, it's more of a way to do it, not necessarily like a single click way. In order for them to just get access immediately would be for you to invite them in as crew. Any other questions, Brian?
Yeah, we've got a handful here. So related, how long does it take the guest pass view to update with new additions? As long as I hit refresh, it's going to pull the latest and greatest. So the key there is that they're going to have to refresh that link, and then it will pull in literally down to a second ago any updates that had taken place in there. JP, Jessica Kaufman's asked, how do you create a new line inside of your rundown? And is there a way to do that without adding it to the very bottom of the show?
Absolutely. Great question. There are a few different ways for you to do it. One at the bottom, of course, add item. Another would be for you to use the row edit menu, which is this gear that appears to the left of a row, and select the add row, add item row, or add a title row. But probably my favorite and most commonly used method is keyboard shortcuts, which in my case is Shift Command down. And I'll just hit that 3 or 4 times, and that'll create a new cluster of rows right there below where my cursor is. So that'd be the best.
Yeah, the keyboard shortcuts are great. You can access those in the row edit menu that JP just showed. You'll see those listed on the right side, and then also the big question mark in the top right, as JP is showing right now, also allows you to search through all the keyboard shortcuts. So there's a bunch in there. If you're a pro user, you probably have at least a good 10 of those memorized, but there's a lot more in there to explore. Another question, how does tracking work during rehearsals? For example, if you're rehearsing in non-show order. Great question from Glenn Abrams. JP, do you want to show the tracking feature?
Sure. Let me go ahead and jump over to a different script. We'll go over here to company meeting. And in rehearsals, you can, just like during the actual live broadcast, just begin broadcasting your location and show. Right now I'm taking on the role of a presenter. And let me go ahead and zoom in using the browser zoom here so that we see this a little bit better, or so you guys see it a little bit better. If I hit the space bar, that will move the tracking bar to the very next row. And if I say I'm jumping out of order, I can do that too. I can scroll ahead and say, all right, now we're going to tackle finance, and just click on that blue button that appears whenever I hover over a row. Now, there's a few different ways to call the show, use keyboard shortcuts, etc. But that's a way. And when people ask that question in regards to how do I do that in rehearsal versus not? There is no functional difference between calling the show in rehearsals and calling the show during the actual show. If you are using one of our built-in features called the timestamp column, which again, I suspect is something that our day 2 or session number 2 people will be covering, you can just clear out all of these timestamps that got automatically added when you called the show during rehearsals. That way you have an accurate set of timestamps from your actual event. But then again, you could probably just filter out the timestamps based on them occurring during rehearsals. So yeah.
That's great. Another question, again from Jessica, how do you get different colored text in the same cell?
Sure. So there is a cell formatting toolbar at the top, and that will allow you to change all of the contents of a cell to a particular color. In this case, if I was changing the font, I would do so by selecting that icon there. However, if I wanted to change text, let's find one here. Okay. If I wanted to say acknowledge remote attendance, and I know that this is going to be a live shot and I want to use some color formatting, then instead of using the cell formatting toolbar at the top, I will instead use this toolbar, the pop-up toolbar, and select this eyedropper here, and maybe, yeah, we'll just go with right there. And now I've added colorful text to my to my cells. And of course, you can do that again for a different word and do a different color if you so choose. And thank you for that reminder. I meant to jump into that.
Yeah, so that's great when you're editing the content in a cell and you want to have different colored text or words, maybe calling a word out, using that in cell font formatting versus the high level font formatting or formatting toolbar at the top. While we're on the topic of colors, JP, Phil has asked about color coding elements and rows as a trick. And I do believe that we have in some of our templates a legend at the top Would you mind talking through maybe some best practices around color coding specific types of elements?
Sure. There's a few, I think it's really up to you and what your preference will end up being, but there are a few different ways for you to color code your content. One would be to color code the entire contents of a row. And you can use global highlights, which again will be under the row edit menu. And then you simply select the color you wish to use, and that entire row will be in that color. I use those in headers and footers often, and try not to use them in my content rows, but really it's up to you guys. And this could just be a really effective way for everyone to communicate, hey, these are videos are green, live shots are pink, the audience shots or crowd cam is going to be something else. You can do that. I tend to prefer personally either doing something like this, where I will highlight a cell yellow, bringing a little bit more attention to the fact that I still need to design some video content for that particular part of the script, or doing so like I do in the hockey template and elsewhere, which is I'll use a little bit of color at the front of a title to distinguish between the type of row that it is. And as far as the legend goes, that is something that I created myself in most of those templates that do happen to have a legend. And I would just say things like orange equals PA read. And then I would just highlight it and use this same formatting toolbar that I showed you earlier to apply the changes. So say orange equals PA read.
That's great. What other types of things would you put in, I guess, the header or the legend? I think that the example of the rundown that we built for today's show brings in other things like crew notes and stuff like that. Maybe show that off again, JP.
Yeah. One thing that I like to do is bring in things like your production crew notes, like when your crew call times are, when we're going to have our crew meeting, if there is a setup, things like that, just general times at the top. Then also points of contact so that you know who is doing what, and what roles are being filled if you need to find someone to fill a role, stuff like that. But it can be all sorts of additional content on there. This is just what we currently have.
Yeah. Question from Eric, how to toggle the preset column. So maybe touch on the show settings.
Yes. So the preset column, in fact, all of the timing columns are optional. You don't necessarily have to have those turned on. And a good example of that might be this media list document that I created. Let's say I don't need to have auto time calculations. I don't need to have start times visible. I don't even need to have durations visible. I can toggle those columns off. And if the question is in regards to the preset time column, what name it gets at the top, it's all done here in this drop down here. You get to select what the format of the timing is, how it's displayed. And if you happen to select clock time as the format, we will change the header of that column to be clock time. Otherwise, it'll just say preset time, and you can select between the different formats that we have here. Preset time, of course, is our default. Clock time is one where we're not using the hour variable, where if we go over 60 minutes, it's 90 minutes, 100 minutes, etc. 6-digit time and humanized time, where we're just showing 1M 30S if it's 1 minute and 30 seconds. So that's a little bit about how you would change that.
That's great. And strongly encourage you to leverage the templates. When you're in there, you can save any show that you've got set up as a template. And when you do that, it's going to save just about every possible setting that you can add in on a show. Your crew, even the people that you've invited in, the layout that they've specified, and the column order, which columns they've chosen to hide versus show, which view that they're in, whether it's featured view or the compact view, all of that stuff gets saved in that template. So we had a question, what's the benefits of starting in Shoflo versus starting in Excel and importing a CSV. It's really that, so that when you are able to leverage a template, you can start from a point that is exactly with the settings, whether it's timing, your layout, your views, that's most helpful based on the type of show. And you can create as many templates as you want as well. So if you're doing a very simple show versus a very technically complex, maybe it's a hybrid event versus in person, maybe it's virtual only. And so all of those are going to lend themselves to some different scenarios or different template layouts.
Well, question? I think we are going a little over on our time for today, Brian, but it sounds like we've got a few more questions.
Yeah, we can just do quick fire around here. Any plans for a Stream Deck plugin?
I can take that one, Brian. Not a proper plugin like partnership with Stream Deck. However, you can map keyboard shortcuts to a button. And because we have so many keyboard shortcuts already in there, and keyboard shortcuts are a priority for us, we will continue to add even more. If you got ideas, send them our way. We want to hear them. That would be the way that you can leverage a Stream Deck and either Rundown, Studio, or a prompter even.
Yep. Can you limit access to media, i.e. confidential distribution? This question from Glenn Abrams.
The way to do that would be to put that confidential media in a different event. Because right now, if you add crew to an event, they will have access to all files that are a part of that event.
Mm-hmm.
So,
in the vein of security, JP, are these files that we're storing here encrypted?
Yes, they are. Yeah.
Let's see. Audio playback. So if you were to link an audio file to a rundown, how would the engineer then actually take that and play it back?
It would depend on the hardware that your particular control room, your setup. But the idea is you're sharing the file with them. They, as the engineer, can download it and then do with it what they need to do to get it on your system.
Great. Let's see. There's more questions around guest pass, how to onboard guests and train them. Maybe point to the educate articles, JP, maybe the Getting Started series.
Yes, that is a great idea. And by the way, you can find a ton of useful, helpful content, articles, videos, etc. at learn.shoflo.tv. The Getting Started section here is probably the best place to start. There's lots of videos in here that go over different pieces of the application, and the ones at the very top are, in my opinion, the ones to start with.
Cool. Question from John Lucas. I'm a show caller. If I create a template while working at company X, can I access later when working at company Z? I can take that one, John. If you're on your own team account and you invite in a client to event X and you create a template there, you can save that on the team level to then later access for another client's event. And that client would not be able to see any files or information from any other events. And so that's really the hierarchy and way that we've designed Shoflo is you have a team and then events within the team that you can invite crew in, and those crew will be specific to that event. They will not see any other content from any other events. You do just want to be careful if you're saving a template. You probably want to clear out any client-specific information before you save that as a template so that when you add that to another event, it's not pulling in info from a prior event. Let's see. I think that's probably it. And we are at the top of the hour here. So thank you very much, JP, for walking us through all of that. It was a great first session. Reminder, in 2 weeks, that's July 15th, same time, 2 p.m. Eastern, we're going to be running through session 2, Beyond the Rundown. We did get into a little bit today what it's like to collaborate with your crew, but that's going to be specifically what we're dialing in on in next session. we're going to have John Alexander and Sharif Oliver, 2 product specialists here at Shoflo, walking us through that. It's really the next phase in the event timeline is once you've really built out the rundown, inviting people in and getting the most out of working collaboratively with your team. If you've already registered for the Rundown Bootcamp, you're already registered for session 2, same place. And reminder, if you've not done a personal demo, we encourage you to sign up for that. That would be with one of our product specialists to talk through your specific workflow, find out how to best set up your trial with templates and all that good stuff so that you can get the most out of exploring Shoflo. And then we would also talk through licensing options on those calls. So thank you, everybody, for your time and attention today and all the great questions. We will have a recording of this being sent out if you registered. So stay tuned for that, and we will see you in a couple of weeks.